Okay, let's begin. We're going to unpack some extremely difficult and sensitive material today. We're examining a tragedy that spanned two countries and really exposed some devastating flaws in the justice and child protection systems. This is the case of Andrew David Bagby, a promising 28-year-old medical doctor who was murdered in 2001. And it's also the story of the subsequent murder of his infant son, Zachary Andrew Turner, who was born in 2002 and tragically killed just a year later, 2003.
And it's so important that we approach this as more than just a timeline of crimes. Because while the facts themselves are truly shocking, our focus has to be on this critical examination of systemic failure. What we really see here is how one very determined violent individual exploited the gaps and, the good faith legal principles of both the Canadian and the American systems. The inquiry that followed concluded, and this is chilling, that Zachary's death was unequivocally preventable.
Preventable.
Yes. That realization that an entire system failed a vulnerable child, that is the core tragedy we need to explore.
And that focus on prevention is just so vital. Our analysis is really designed to give you, the listener, a thorough understanding of exactly how this sequence unfolded. We have to begin by establishing the perpetrator's escalating history of, erratic, confrontational, and deeply concerning behavior long before she ever met Andrew Bagby. From there, we'll move through the timeline of Andrew's murder, the investigation, the very fraught international extradition process, and then the controversial Canadian bail and custody decisions that followed. And finally, we have to talk about the lasting and necessary legislative changes, specifically the law known as Zachary's Bill, that this devastating double murder eventually triggered across Canada.
Right. So let's start at the beginning with the perpetrator herself.
Let's start with the background of Shirley Jane Turner. She was born in 1961. She was a Canadian-American with a very determined, some might even say obsessive, ambition to become a doctor. But even before Andrew Bagby, her life was characterized by a massive amount of personal turbulence, financial instability, and really alarming confrontations.
Yes, and this is where we start to see the patterns. The manipulation, the prioritizing of self-interest that really defined her life. Her pursuit of a medical career began when she enrolled at Memorial University in Newfoundland back in 1980. She was ambitious, for sure, but her personal life was turbulent from the very start. In 1981, she had to interrupt her studies to marry a longtime boyfriend. She was pregnant. Her first son was born in July of 1982.
And then a daughter followed 3 years later.
Yes, a daughter in 1985. But that first marriage dissolved. She then entered a relationship with a fisherman from Corner Brook and married him in July 1988, just a month after the first marriage formally ended.
And during that turbulent transition period, there's another alarming detail that really speaks to the chaos surrounding her. In July 1988, the same month she remarried, she also had an abortion. And the father of that pregnancy was not the man she was marrying.
That's correct. And then she gave birth to her second daughter in March 1990, just before she and her second husband separated in 1991. So, before the critical timeline of this case even begins, you have a woman with 3 children across 2 marriages and just significant personal disruption.
It's a lot to manage.
It is. She completed her undergraduate work while raising these 3 young children, largely with the help of her second husband. But the most alarming detail in this early history, a detail that in hindsight is just a crucial missed warning sign of systemic failure, is an investigation that occurred in Newfoundland Social Services in 1993.
Okay, let's pause there and really unpack that investigation. It's a procedural failing that just foreshadows so much of what comes later. What exactly happened in October 1993 regarding her children?
So in October 1993, a man who was boarding at Turner's residence, he went to his therapist, and he confided that he had personally witnessed Turner engaging in physical and emotional abuse toward 2 of her children.
And that confidence triggered an official investigation.
It did. It triggered an official social services investigation. The social service workers, they interviewed the children. And the children themselves confirmed specific details. They described their mother as a strict disciplinarian who used spankings and beatings with a belt as punishment.
That sounds like credible testimony, directly from the alleged victims, from children. And yet the investigation was closed not long after. How does that happen?
This is the critical procedural failure. Her second husband, when they interviewed him, he tried to downplay it. He claimed Turner only used the belt as a threat. But the case was closed on January 11, 1994, without the social service workers ever speaking to Shirley Turner herself.
Wait, they never interviewed her?
Never. Think about that. You have a clear allegation of abuse, confirmed by the children, and the primary alleged perpetrator was never directly confronted or interviewed by the agency tasked with protecting those children.
That is a profound breakdown in protocol. It suggests either a lack of rigor or maybe an early unwillingness to confront her documented hostility.
I think that's a fair assessment. And if we connect that failure to the broader pattern of her life, you also see how her ambition consistently superseded her parental responsibility. Just 3 years after that investigation closed, she divorced her second husband. She was granted custody of their daughter, but within days of the ruling, she shipped that daughter off to live with her father.
And her other two children.
They were already living with their paternal grandmother. She essentially dispersed her children. She outsourced their care entirely so she could focus on getting her medical degree.
And this professional pursuit ties directly into some pretty alarming financial misconduct, which further illustrates her priorities. The source material details how she treated the financial savings that were meant for her own children.
Yes, we see a very clear pattern of her prioritizing her immediate expensive needs, her living expenses, her doctoral education, over the long-term financial stability of her children. Since 1982, she had been systematically taking money that was designated for them, specifically their governmental baby bonuses, from a scholarship fund intended for their college education.
Their college education.
Right. And in the summer of 2000, she actually confessed to a relative that she had spent all of those savings.
She spent their college funds on herself.
Yes, essentially liquidating their future education for her own immediate expenses. She promised the relative she would repay it all once she completed her post-residency training and started earning what she called big money. It paints a picture of someone who, when faced with a conflict between her own ambitious goals and the needs of her dependent children, chose her goals every single time. This transactional self-serving approach is a cornerstone of her psychological profile.
Let's shift that lens of observation now to her professional conduct. This is during her medical residencies between 1998 and 2000, after she'd earned her medical degree. The staff impressions from that time are incredibly telling.
They are more than telling. They are definitive evidence of a deeply troubled and manipulative personality. During her residency in 1999 at a family practice in St. John's, her professionalism was severely criticized. When confronted with necessary negative feedback, the kind of criticism all residents receive, her supervising physician reported that she would become quite hostile, yelling, crying, and accusing me of treating her unfairly.
That sounds like a very dramatic and disruptive response to what should be routine professional critique. Did that pattern escalate?
It did. It led to concrete and objective failures during her remedial second residency in early 2000. She missed 9 days of the 3-month rotation. And crucially, she was caught falsifying clinical reports.
Falsifying records. In a medical context, that's a severe ethical and professional breach.
A huge breach. Yet her response was always deflection and aggression.
So what was the atmosphere like for the other staff members who had to manage her behavior, knowing she was capable of that kind of volatility and dishonesty?
Well, the clinic staff became so concerned about her approach to confrontation and the truth that they had to create a specific internal policy. They made a deliberate decision never to give her feedback or hold any major discussion with her alone. They needed witnesses.
Wow. That shows you just how distrustful they were of her ability to manage reality or even report accurately on a conversation.
That supervisor's impression really sticks out, especially considering he'd overseen so many other residents. He felt constantly manipulated. He stated that whenever negative items came up, she would immediately change the topic to one of my failings. And while she could be outwardly charming, friendly, and lively, the physician observed that when she was caught in an untruth, she would become angry, accusatory, and loud.
He also said that she seemed to be putting on a show, right? Like she was playing a role but had no real feeling for her work.
Exactly. That sense of superficial commitment stood out dramatically when compared to the hundreds of residents this physician had supervised over 21 years. And that leads to the most profound insight from the professional sphere. In a later interview, reflecting on the experience after everything had happened, the supervising physician described Turner, in hindsight, using extremely strong language. He called her a manipulative, guiltless psychopath.
The psychopath, from a medical professional who supervised her.
Yes. The situation was so disruptive, so concerning, and so unique in his experience that the St. John's practice felt compelled to make significant constructive changes to its entire residency evaluation process. They had to change how they did business just because of her.
That is massive. They were forced to rewrite their internal systems to prevent another encounter like hers. It's a chilling parallel to the national legislative change that followed the tragedy itself. It shows her behavior was a systemic stress test on any institution she touched.
Absolutely. And yet, by the summer of 2000, Turner had technically completed the requirements of her residency training. She was officially qualified to practice medicine despite this alarming pattern.
And that professional pattern of confrontation and manipulation was tragically mirrored and even escalated in her personal life, specifically in the severe stalking case involving a man named Miles Doucet, which took place between 1996 and 1999. This really demonstrates that her capacity for obsession and violence was already well developed.
It does. Turner began a relationship with Doucet in 1996. She was significantly older than him, 13 years his senior. When Doucet ended the relationship and moved, Turner began just inundating him with phone calls. The harassment quickly escalated beyond calls into physical confrontation. In November 1997, she tracked him down in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and violently struck him in the jaw with her high-heeled shoe.
Wait, so this wasn't just harassment or psychological manipulation. There was a documented physical assault with a weapon prior to Andrew Bagby's murder. How did that violent history not factor more heavily into the later bail decisions? This is a critical point for our later discussion on the judicial failures.
It's essential context. And her pursuit only intensified. When Doucet attempted to find safety by moving across the border to Westtown Township, Pennsylvania in 1998, Turner relentlessly followed him. She pursued him across provinces and international borders, leaving threatening voicemails and making unannounced visits to his Pennsylvania apartment for over a year.
The level of fear he must have experienced, it must have been immense.
It was. Doucet had to summon state troopers on multiple occasions just to compel her to leave, and he explicitly told the police he genuinely feared what Dr. Turner would do next. Her pursuit was relentless, obsessive, and documented by law enforcement in 2 different countries.
And the intensity of her instability culminated in this highly theatrical, critical event on April 7, 1999, outside Doucet's apartment.
Right. Doucet found Turner lying semi-conscious outside his residence. She had attempted suicide by ingesting 65 milligrams of various over-the-counter drugs. But crucially, the scene was staged for maximum dramatic impact and emotional manipulation. She was wearing a black dress, carrying a bouquet of red roses, and had placed 2 suicide notes nearby.
2 notes. What did they say?
One note was addressed directly to Miles Doucet, clearly meant to invoke guilt. The other was addressed to her psychiatrist, and it contained that very telling line, "I am not evil, just sick." She received medical intervention and survived. But this entire history, the social services failure, the financial deception, the professional diagnosis of psychopathy, and this documented pattern of obsessive stalking leading to physical assault and theatrical suicide attempts, it establishes a long, clear pattern. A pattern of possessiveness and dangerous emotional extremity that leads directly and tragically into her relationship with Andrew Bagby.
So a clear, documented history of violence and stalking spanning years, crossing international borders, and culminating in extreme theatrical manipulation. That is the context we need to carry forward. Now we need to turn our attention to the victim, Andrew David Bagby. He was born in 1973 in Sunnyvale, California. Andrew was a medical student at Memorial University when he began dating Shirley Turner in early 1999. His background was solid, stable. He came from a respected family, his father, David, a U.S. Navy veteran and computer engineer, and his mother, Kathleen, a registered nurse and midwife.
Andrew was a grounded individual who met Turner while pursuing his medical career. But their relationship was immediately challenged by distance after their graduation. Andrew started a surgical residency in Syracuse, New York in May of 2000. Turner, meanwhile, moved to Sac City, Iowa in August 2000 to work for a physicians corporation. They tried to manage the long-distance thing, but the dynamic was already unstable.
You mentioned that Turner visited Andrew 7 times while he only visited her once during this period. That already hints at her controlling nature. But there's a specific incident that suggests her intrusive behavior was escalating even before the final confrontation.
That's right. During one of her visits to Andrew in Syracuse, Turner is strongly believed to have burglarized his apartment. This act suggests that her controlling nature, her inability to respect boundaries, and her willingness to cross legal lines were already manifesting within their relationship dynamic.
By the fall of 2001, Andrew had moved to Latrobe, Pennsylvania for a family practice residency. Turner, who had moved jobs within Iowa, continued her characteristic possessive behavior, harassing him repeatedly over the phone. But in October 2001, the situation moved from harassment to premeditated action. This is where we see the calculated preparation for murder.
This is a crucial timeline overlap that proves premeditation. In October 2001, weeks before the murder, Turner obtained a permit to buy a firearm in Iowa. She purchased a Phoenix Arms HP-22 handgun and .22 ammunition. She then attended firearms lessons. She practiced using the exact weapon she would later use to kill Andrew. She acquired the means to kill while simultaneously attempting one last manipulation to salvage the relationship.
And that manipulation was the pregnancy lie.
Yes. On October 13, Turner told Andrew she was 3 months pregnant, knowing he'd feel obligated to discuss their future. Andrew, being a responsible person, agreed to meet her. Turner then visited him in Latrobe in late October, immediately after taking her last firearms lessons in Omaha.
Their arguments must have reached a breaking point during that visit, particularly concerning Andrew's relationship with a new girlfriend he had started seeing in Latrobe.
They absolutely did. The relationship's final, explosive end occurred on November 3, 2001. Turner confessed, finally, that she had been lying about the pregnancy, or so Andrew thought, in a desperate last-ditch effort to keep him. Andrew, furious at this level of deception, immediately drove her to the Arnold Palmer Regional Airport, bring up with her over lunch, and put her on a plane back to Iowa.
We know now, of course, that her confession that she was not pregnant was itself another lie. But at the time, Andrew believed the deception was over. Her actions in the 24 hours that followed show clear, cold, and rapid premeditation following that final rejection.
A timeline is just tight and horrifying.
Yeah.
On Sunday, November 4, 2001, Turner made 3 phone calls to Andrew's residence in Latrobe. Then sometime around 1 p.m. local time, she embarked on a massive solo 16-hour drive. She covered 1,523 kilometers, that's 946 miles from Iowa, back across state lines to Latrobe. She traveled with her newly purchased loaded Phoenix Arms handgun stored inside a gun box in her Toyota RV4. This was not a spontaneous act of passion. This is a dedicated hours-long pursuit with a murder weapon.
She arrived in Latrobe sometime in the early hours of Monday, November 5, and confronted Andrew at his residence. His demeanor that morning confirmed it.
Right. Andrew arrived at work that Monday morning in a visibly agitated state. He told his supervisor, T. Clark Simpson, about Turner's sudden, unexpected, and unwanted appearance after their intense breakup just 36 hours earlier.
And Simpson, sensing the danger, wisely advised Andrew not to meet with her in private.
Andrew dismissed that advice. He believed he could manage the situation, that he could end the conflict once and for all. He did promise Simpson he would visit his house after talking to Turner that evening, likely for moral support. It was a promise he tragically could not keep. Turner later drove away and left a message on Andrew's answering machine. The following morning, November 6, Andrew's body was discovered.
The scene was Keystone State Park in Derry Township, Pennsylvania. He was found in a remote day-use parking lot, and he had been shot 5 times with CCI .22 bullets in the face, the chest, the buttocks, and the back of the head. That sheer number of shots suggests intense rage and a desire to ensure death.
The Pennsylvania State Police immediately launched an investigation, and based on statements from T. Clark Simpson and other friends, Turner became the immediate focus. When they contacted her, she provided her initial alibi. She claimed to have been homesick in bed in Iowa on November 5.
But the investigators quickly dismantled that alibi using technology and meticulous forensic work.
That's the power of concrete evidence. They compiled just overwhelming forensic data that undeniably placed her in Latrobe during the time of the murder. This included records of cell phone usage showing she made cross-country calls to and from the Latrobe area. And furthermore, she had used Andrew's home computer to access her personal accounts, specifically eBay and Hotmail. She also used his home phone to call in sick to her own job in Iowa.
That detail is just astonishing. Using the victim's phone to cover her tracks by calling in sick hundreds of miles away, it shows a level of cold calculation amidst the violence. When she was confronted with this irrefutable data, her story collapsed.
It did. She changed her narrative. She admitted she did meet with Andrew at Keystone State Park, but now she claimed that Andrew had placed the gun in his trunk. This new story was designed to distance herself from the murder weapon, but it was just as riddled with contradictions as the first. She had previously told her shooting instructor that her gun had been stolen, so she was misleading multiple authorities simultaneously.
And beyond the digital trail and the contradictory stories, there was crucial physical evidence linking her directly to the scene and the weapon.
Absolutely conclusive evidence. Investigators recovered an unspent round-alive bullet near Andrew's body. They confirmed with their shooting instructor that Turner's specific handgun model ejected live rounds when it was fired. The recovered round was consistent with her recently purchased weapon. It places the gun, and therefore her, at the scene.
And there was a witness.
Yes. A Derry resident provided a statement reporting seeing Andrew's Toyota Corolla parked next to Turner's distinctive Toyota RAV4 just 10 minutes after Andrew made his last confirmed phone call to Simpson. The next morning, only the Corolla remained.
So she arrived, she confronted him, she killed him, and she fled. And they also found evidence back at her apartment suggesting the trip was meticulously planned.
Yes, further confirming premeditation. MapQuest printouts, the common navigation tool of the time for road directions specifically leading to Latrobe, were found in her Council Bluffs apartment. And in a bizarre, intimate detail, a box of condoms found in her apartment had a lot number that perfectly matched a box Andrew had purchased in Latrobe on the night of their breakup. The evidence was just overwhelming.
And yet, despite all that conclusive evidence, she managed to escape justice, at least in the immediate aftermath.
Correct. Pennsylvania authorities were gathering the final elements of the case, but Turner fled the country before they could obtain a formal arrest warrant. She flew to Toronto and then resettled in St. John's, Newfoundland by November 12, 2001, effectively turning a criminal investigation into a complex international extradition case.
Turner's flight to Canada complicated the legal process immensely, but the real heartbreaking development was the discovery that turned a murder investigation into a protracted, painful, and ultimately tragic international custody battle for Andrew's parents, David and Kathleen Bagby.
The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, the RNC, they quickly placed Turner under surveillance in St. John's, working closely with the Pennsylvania State Police. On December 10, 2001, their intelligence unit conducted a pivotal piece of investigative work. They seized her trash. This mundane act yielded the critical, devastating plot twist. They discovered printouts for an ultrasound taken on November 29.
And this confirmed the reality that Andrew had never known, that Turner was, in fact, pregnant and the child was Andrew's.
Yes. The ultrasound confirmed the fetus was Andrew's, conceived before the murder. This revelation meant that her confession to Andrew on November 3, that she was lying about the pregnancy to manipulate him, was itself another lie. The real motive for telling him she wasn't pregnant was likely to hasten the breakup so she could later claim he abandoned her, or simply to enrage him before she killed him. This single piece of evidence, confirming the pending arrival of Andrew's child, drastically altered the entire legal and emotional landscape.
With the murder charge pending, Turner was arrested on December 12, 2001, the same day the official extradition proceedings began. Then came the first of the controversial legal decisions that would later be subjected to such intense, necessary scrutiny.
That scrutiny focuses squarely on Newfoundland Justice Gail Welsh. Despite the gravity of the charges awaiting Turner in Pennsylvania first-degree murder, suggesting calculated violence and a massive flight risk, Justice Welsh released the 40-year-old Turner from prison. The judge stated her belief that Turner was not a threat to society.
That determination seems just astonishing. Given her documented history of cross-border stalking, physical assault with a weapon, and now being the prime suspect in a brutal multiple-shot murder, how did the judge rationalize that she was not a threat to society?
The rationale was based on a very narrow interpretation of Beale law. The idea was that Andrew was the specific, isolated target. Therefore, the judge reasoned, Turner did not pose a general threat to the public at large. This interpretation completely failed to consider the danger Turner posed to the specific vulnerable individuals in her life.
Namely, the child she was carrying.
Precisely. The bail was set at CAD $75,000, which she was required to post, along with conditions like surrendering her passports and weekly RNC check-ins.
And the funding of that substantial bond involved a critical ethical lapse by a medical professional.
It did. Turner posted bail with financial help from her psychiatrist, John Doucette, who was also a former co-worker from Memorial University. This action was highly irregular. It was a clear conflict of interest, a breach of professional boundaries. Doucette's involvement later resulted in him being found guilty of professional misconduct. It really demonstrates the lengths people went to support Turner, even when the evidence of her violence and instability was so clear.
The moment the pregnancy was confirmed, Andrew's parents, David and Kathleen Bagby, immediately moved their lives to St. John's, Newfoundland. They were there to fight tirelessly for custody of their future grandchild, believing they had a moral and physical imperative to protect that child from the woman accused of murdering their son.
Zachary Andrew Turner was born on July 18, 2002, and from the moment of his birth, Turner actively sought to obstruct any contact between Zachary and his grandparents. She initially refused to let them see the infant, claiming falsely that she feared they would kidnap him. She demonstrated an absolute resolve to isolate the child, even going so far as to discharge her family law lawyer simply because he exhibited a positive attitude towards the Bagby's desire for involvement.
Despite this obstruction, David and Kathleen did manage to spend a considerable amount of time with Zachary during his first year of life, and there were observations regarding the child's attachment to his mother versus his grandparents.
Yes, and these observations are incredibly poignant in light of what followed. It was noted on several occasions that Zachary seemed to have poor attachment to his mother. He clearly preferred the company of other adults, particularly his grandparents. It suggests that even at that young age, Zachary wasn't receiving the nurturing, stable relationship he needed from Turner, and he gravitated toward the safety and warmth of the Bagbys.
And that innate preference was actually voiced by Turner herself, demonstrating her emotional detachment from the child even as she fought to keep him.
Exactly. At Zachary's first birthday party, held at a St. John's McDonald's, Turner made a chillingly detached comment directly to Kathleen Bagby. She said, "He obviously loves you more than me, so why don't you take him?" This was only 1 month before she killed him. That statement reveals her awareness of the child's preference and hints at the massive emotional conflict she faced.
This brings us to the second and perhaps most devastating, controversial bail release in January 2003. Turner had been returned to jail in November 2002, pending the federal justice minister's final decision on her extradition to the U.S.
And yet Justice Welch released her again in January 2003. The justification remained the same. The murder was still characterized as not directed at the public at large. And the court again emphasized the constitutional principle that Turner was presumed innocent until proven guilty in the U.S. court system.
We have to emphasize why this second judicial decision is the core systemic failure in this narrative. It was the ultimate fatal error.
It was a catastrophic decision rooted in a failure of risk assessment. By releasing her, the court allowed Turner, a documented flight risk and accused of a calculated violent murder, to regain full, unsupervised custody of a 1-year-old child while still awaiting extradition. The court's adherence to the constitutional principle of presumption of innocence for the accused adult entirely superseded the fundamental, absolute requirement of ensuring the physical safety of a 1-year-old infant who was entirely defenseless.
It seems the Canadian system treated a violent murder charge connected to a custody issue exactly the same way they would treat, say, a white-collar crime. They failed to see the specific, concentrated danger posed to the child. The Bagbys, who were fighting this decision, they must have been devastated, knowing they were losing precious time.
They fought desperately. They pleaded with authorities that Turner was a risk, citing her history of violence, manipulation, and the fact that she was accused of killing the child's father. But the judiciary insisted that until she was proven guilty, her rights to her child were paramount. The system, in its attempt to be fair to the accused, became blind to the profound danger staring them in the face. This decision ultimately sealed Zachary's fate. It set the stage for the tragedy only 7 months later.
The judicial system's failure culminated in tragedy on August 18, 2003, in Conception Bay, South Newfoundland. Zachary was just 1 year and 1 month old. We have to detail these final events with the greatest sensitivity and respect for the victims.
On that Monday, Zachary was scheduled to be in his mother's custody. Turner, facing the looming reality of extradition to Pennsylvania, which would inevitably separate her from Zachary, acted with final, deadly premeditation.
What were her specific actions that day?
Turner first visited a St. John's pharmacy and purchased a supply of her prescription, lorazepam, which is a powerful sedative used to treat anxiety. She then returned to her residence and mixed the lorazepam into Zachary's baby formula, ensuring the dosage was sufficient to render him deeply unconscious.
And then the final tragic act.
Once the infant was unconscious from the sedative, she ingested a toxic, fatal dosage of lorazepam herself. She then fastened Zachary to her chest, using a sweater, a grotesque parody of a nurturing embrace, and walked to a fishing wharf at Foxtrap Marina. She jumped into the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean.
A murder-suicide designed to prevent Zachary from ever being raised by the Bagbys, exercising the ultimate control.
Precisely. The bodies were found later that day on a beach by a vacationing couple.
And what were the forensic findings regarding Zachary's immediate cause of death?
The post-mortem confirmed that Zachary Turner was rendered unconscious by the lorazepam before entering the water, which means he did not suffer the terror of drowning. Turner died by drowning, but the drugs she ingested ensured the lethality of her own act. Her motive was clear: avoid facing justice for Andrew's murder and, more crucially, ensure that the Bagby family would never raise their grandson.
In the immediate aftermath, there was administrative fallout, specifically disciplinary action against the psychiatrist who helped Turner secure her initial release.
Yes. The focus immediately turned back to the people who had enabled her freedom. John Doucet, the psychiatrist who assisted Turner with that CAD $75,000 bond, he faced a disciplinary board convened by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Newfoundland and Labrador. In May 2006, Doucet was formally found guilty of professional misconduct for illegally funding her bail.
And what were the specific consequences he faced for that ethical lapse?
He was ordered to pay a $10,000 fine, which covered one-third of the $30,000 cost of the inquiry. He was also ordered to undergo psychiatric counseling, suggesting the board felt he had demonstrated poor judgment that extended beyond the financial transaction. David Bagby expressed satisfaction that the ruling would set a precedent, affirming that professionals should not use their resources to circumvent justice in these kinds of cases. Doucet later left Newfoundland and relocated elsewhere in Canada.
But the larger, more profound failure was judicial, and it demanded a governmental response that went beyond disciplinary actions against a single individual.
The system had to account for its failures. Zachary's death, which occurred directly because the court prioritized an accused murderer's rights over the child's absolute safety, triggered a deep governmental analysis in Newfoundland and Labrador.
This analysis became known as the Turner Review and Investigation, or the Markistan Review. Can you detail who led this review and why its conclusions were so foundational to the legal change that followed?
The review was led by Dr. Peter Markistan, a respected Winnipeg-based coroner, and the final report was issued in 2006. This report is perhaps the most crucial document regarding the institutional failures. It didn't mince words. The review unequivocally concluded that Zachary's death was preventable, shifting the blame squarely onto the provincial systems designed to protect him.
And what exactly did the review find regarding the conduct of Newfoundland and Labrador's social services system?
The review leveled severe criticism at the social services system for failing in its fundamental duty. The core institutional error, as identified by Markistan, was philosophical. Social service officials repeatedly operated on the legal presumption of Turner's innocence, just like the courts. As a result, they became more concerned for her welfare than for Zachary's. This meant that the mother's rights as an accused person were consistently allowed to override the absolute requirement of ensuring the child's physical and emotional safety.
So, the review argued that the system's deference to the legal principle of innocence made it effectively blind to the real, acute danger that Turner represented.
Exactly. They were legally trained to see a defendant, but not socially trained to see a high-risk parent. The review cited poor communication between various social service officials and highlighted a fundamental lack of ongoing assessment of the safety needs of the children. The provincial government of Newfoundland and Labrador accepted the report's conclusions, acknowledged the failure, and committed to implementing all 29 of its specific recommendations.
The need for broader change, however, extended beyond provincial social services. It required a change to Canadian federal law to address the flawed judicial reasoning used by Justice Welsh. And this legislative push was driven by the tireless activism of David and Kathleen Bagby. David had previously documented their harrowing experience in his 2007 book, Dance with the Devil, a memoir of murder and loss.
Their efforts gained national attention and significant political support. In October 2009, then Liberal Member of Parliament Scott Andrews introduced Bill C-464. This legislation, famously known as Zachary's Bill, was designed to address the exact loophole that allowed Turner to walk free twice.
Can you detail the precise legal function of Zachary's Bill? How did it change the criminal code to override the reasoning of the courts in this case?
The bill was directly targeted at amending the Canadian Criminal Code to fundamentally strengthen the conditions for bail, particularly in cases involving serious violence. It introduced a new provision that explicitly allows courts to justify refusing bail to those accused of serious crimes, murder, attempted murder, sexual assault, when that refusal is necessary to protect the safety and security of their children. Crucially, the law mandates that the safety of the child becomes a paramount consideration, overriding the typical criteria for release.
So this means that if an accused parent is deemed a risk, a judge can deny bail specifically to protect the child, even if the judge believes the accused is not a threat to the general public.
That is the profound shift. It legally codified the idea that when assessing the danger posed by an accused parent, the risk calculation must prioritize the vulnerable family member above all else. This bill garnered massive, unanimous support in the Canadian House of Commons, a rare moment of political agreement.
Right.
It was signed into law on December 16, 2010.
MP Scott Andrews noted that the passage of this law was a measure of success. It gave the Bagbys a vital sense that their cries for justice had resulted in tangible change, something that would prevent this specific tragedy from ever being repeated. A profoundly hard-won victory, but one that provided a lasting sense of purpose derived from the most profound loss imaginable.
And beyond the legal reform, the story had a massive cultural impact, ensuring Andrew and Zachary were remembered by millions through the 2008 documentary film, Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father.
The film was written and directed by Crook Kuhn, a childhood friend of Andrew Bagby from California. Kuhn originally began the film as a tribute, a historical record intended for Zachary, and it was filmed while the grandparents were still fighting for custody.
The film is so unique because it integrates extensive home movies that Kuhn and Andrew had shot together growing up. It weaves that joyous footage with interviews of Andrew's family, friends, classmates, colleagues. And Kuhn interviewed these people primarily before Zachary's death, capturing their hope and their frustration. That material was then integrated with interviews conducted afterward, capturing the raw, immediate grief and horror.
I recall the film captured the intense tension surrounding Zachary's first birthday in 2003.
It did. Kuhn actually documented meeting Zachary in Newfoundland to celebrate his first birthday in July 2003, just weeks before his death. Kuhn had to film the segment in secret, deliberately hiding from Shirley Turner during the visit for Zachary's safety. It really showcases the atmosphere of fear, the constant tension surrounding the child's well-being. The film is a powerful testament to the love Andrew inspired and the systemic flaws that allowed his murderer to claim her last victim.
And the film's emotional honesty resonated deeply with audiences and critics. It was named one of the top documentaries of 2008 by the National Board of Review of Motion Pictures and received numerous awards at major film festivals.
That cultural impact, combined with the family's continued efforts, ensured that the legacy of Andrew and Zachary was not solely defined by the horror of their deaths. Instead, it became associated with positive action and advancement. 2 significant scholarships were established in their memory.
First, the Dr. Andrew David Bagby Family Medicine Scholarship, established at Excella Health Latrobe Hospital, honoring Andrew's chosen specialty. This award provides financial support to medical students pursuing family practice.
And second, the Dr. Andrew Bagby and Son Zachary Bursary Fund was created to support students at the Memorial University of Newfoundland, where Andrew attended medical school. These scholarships ensure that their names are permanently associated with the advancement of education, medicine, and discovery, rather than being confined solely to the tragic court records and legislative reform. It's a purposeful effort to draw enduring good from an immense evil.
What we have just reviewed is a comprehensive and deeply unsettling look at how a series of individual decisions, coupled with systemic institutional failures, culminated in a double tragedy. From the Pennsylvania State Police investigation, which gathered irrefutable evidence of premeditation, to the Canadian judicial system's controversial interpretation of bail laws, and finally, the failure of social services to prioritize a child's safety. All these elements aligned to create the conditions for Zachary's murder.
The central theme, reinforced by Zachary's bill, speaks to this difficult ethical and legal challenge faced by all modern justice systems. How do we balance the fundamental enshrined legal principle of the presumption of innocence for the accused adult with the absolute non-negotiable safety needs of a child? The tragedy of Andrew and Zachary forced the legal system to recognize that when an individual is accused of a serious violent crime, particularly against a partner or co-parent, the risk assessment must inherently prioritize the vulnerable party, the child, even if that means restricting the liberty of the accused. And the provocative thought for you to consider is this. In cases where documented violence and credible threats exist, and a child's life is demonstrably at risk, does the legal system have an ethical obligation to shift the burden of proof in matters of child safety? Does the state, in effect, need to temporarily assume danger to protect the innocent?
Thanks for listening.